everyone. I'm Britton with Fresh Systems, also an independent consultant, and I've been involved with the USDA Group Gap program since the old days with Jan and Lindsay. Started in 2013, I think. So I'll talk more about Group Gap and certification here in a little bit. But I'm also from Marquette, Michigan, in Michigan's Upper Peninsula on the southern shore of Lake Superior. So this feels warm to me, which is really nice. Yeah, we'll talk more soon.
So I'm going to hand it off to Phil to talk about different certifications and Group Gap. Okay.
Thanks, Liz. All right, so we're talking about navigating the food safety landscape, right? And as you have just seen, food safety is not just food safety. You know, it is not this monolithic thing. It is a vast spectrum of requirements, and you know, how do you know what you need to do? All these kinds of things. So, kind of like you talk about repetition. To give a quick recap, you have the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, which is law, which is a requirement. You have to follow that if you meet the if you qualify, if you.
Yeah, it's weird if you're covered.
If you're covered, yeah. So if you're covered, you have to comply with that whether you want to or not. But then you also have, on the flip side, this whole world of third-party certification. And certification is when a buyer is saying, okay, well, I want some assurance that you are following these best practices, following this standard. And there's lots of different standards that are written out there. Some of them are benchmarked by another organization. And a buyer is saying, okay, well, I'm not going to be going to your food hub, I'm not going to be going to your farm, so I need some kind of assurance that you are following these practices, and that's where third-party certification comes in. There is no, well, there are FSMA inspections, there is no FSMA certification. You can't say, oh, my buyer wants me to comply with FSMA, so can you come out and audit me to FSMA? That doesn't happen.
Or you get a certificate when you do the training, but that's not certification.
Right. For those on the call, you do get a certificate when you go to the training. But there's no your farm is certified to FSMA. You can only be certified to a third-party audit standard. So that's kind of where certification fits in here. That's what I want to talk about. When it comes to FSMA, I usually point people to people like Lindsay or Sarah. But they know way more than I do. They're way more well versed in this kind of stuff than I am. I'll stay in the certification world. So I am going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of it and also talk about Group Gap. And those of you who were here yesterday are going to see this again. But again, repetition is good. Kaylee, how much time do we have? Just checking real quick.
About 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay. I'll do it quickly so we have lots of time for questions. So normally, certification works by you have I'm going to use the term producer. Understand that could also apply to a food hub as well. Using that term loosely. So you have a producer, and then you reach out to a certifying body that your buyer is saying, you have to be certified to this. You have to be certified via USDA. You have to have a USDA GAP certificate. Or a lot of the farms in my neck of the woods in Michigan are certified to Primus. A lot of the buyers want a Primus certification. There's a whole bunch of other ones out there. And if the choice is yours, you get to pick which one fits your values better, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to use USDA because it's by and large the most common one.
The smaller operator.
Yeah, for our people. USDA comes out, they'll do an audit to the standard, they'll have a checklist, they'll walk through it. If you pass the checklist, pass the audit, you get a certificate. If you don't pass the audit, you'll be issued corrective actions, you have to fix those, they'll probably come back out and re-verify those things. And then you get certified this way. So that is how certification normally works. But earlier we talked about the importance and the benefits of cooperation and collaboration, right? So I'm a co-op guy myself. I spent 8 years on the board of the Marquette Food Co-op, where I'm from, and I love co-ops. So Group Gap is kind of like that. So USDA Group Gap program is not another certification, it's just a different way to get certified. And what it does is it kind of stretches this out a little bit. So USDA is still involved, but rather than having just one producer on their own, producer or food hub, you have a group of producers and members working together. Again, a producer could apply to food hubs. And working with fresh produce. And so rather than the USDA coming and doing the same kind of audit on each individual producer, the group has some sort of internal organization, organize themselves some way. It does not have to be a legal entity. They organize using a tool called a quality management system, which that's my background, it's my wheelhouse. I would love to talk about this all day long. But we don't have a ton of time to talk about how that works right now, but understand that the group determines how they're going to operate and how they're going to bring new members in, how they're going to do their audits, all that kind of stuff. And the group then has internal auditors that are trained to the same USDA standards that go out and do internal audits on each member. So in this kind of scenario, the group is serving in the same role as the USDA is over here. So the group is doing internal audits to the same USDA checklist. The internal auditors have to meet the same qualifications as the USDA auditors, which are typically embedded in state agencies. They go through the same training, same classes, have the same prerequisites, have to maintain continuing professional development every year the same way. But everything's managed inside the group internally. And what the USDA does then is rather than verifying that the producers are meeting the requirements, the USDA is verifying that the system works, this whole system is working. So what they will do is they will come in and audit the group's quality management system and how the group operates. They will look at all of our internal audit reports, all of our internal records, and then they will pick a random sample out of the whole group and do an external audit on those. And they'll compare their external audit reports to our internal audit reports and make sure there's no major discrepancies, because that's, if there are, then maybe the system isn't working as well. So this is kind of the quick and dirty of how Group Gap operates. This can be done to any of the USDA standards. So that would be USDA GAP-GIB, USDA Harmonized, USDA HGAP Plus, which meets the benchmark to GFSI. It also will eventually include the new GMP audit they're rolling out this year for facilities. So, I run a group like this. I've run a group since the early Group Gap days, starting in Upper Michigan. We expanded it to all of Lower Michigan, and then this past year we are now in 6 or 7 different states. We're in the Four Corners, we're in Illinois and Mississippi. And then this coming year, we're going to be expanding into Hawaii and potentially other states as well. And the reason why we've been doing this kind of model is because this piece right here, this quality management system and operating the group and managing internal audits and all that kind of stuff, is pretty labor intensive. And also, it also takes there's a steep learning curve in learning how a QMS operates. And so what we've been doing then is, rather than having these little groups kind of embedded in different places, we're saying, hey, you know what? We have the bandwidth to manage this, but we don't want to go out and travel and do all the internal audits, so why don't we just have regional internal auditors in different areas, and you go to the audits, and we'll manage this, and we'll have a nationwide group. Again, that cooperation, collaboration, working together. Because across a network like this, we can share resources and get all the benefits of cooperation and stuff. So that's the quick on this. I think we probably have maybe like 10 minutes for questions. I can break down this in any more detail if you want, or if you have questions about FSMA and things like that, we can get into that. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how much cheaper it is to do this group versus a third party certification.
Can you repeat
Alright,
that?
yeah.
Cost.
Yeah, so you're asking if this is any cheaper than going like this route.
Not that route necessarily, but any
Yeah, this could be Primus, this could be Leaf. It depends. It depends. There are scenarios where this can be cheaper. There are scenarios where it can be more expensive. You know, and it depends on what kind of costs you want to include into that. You know, if you're paying people to do this, that can be more expensive. It also depends. In this kind of situation, it really depends on where your auditor is based. You know, so if you have an auditor, like a USDA auditor that's in the next town over, that's not going to be that expensive to have them just drive 20 minutes and come do your audit. But this past year, we had one of our members had to have an auditor fly in from Oregon. They were being audited in Chicago. You know, so that was more expensive. But again, because this model does help soften those costs across the group. You know, so the way that our group works is we charge a $450 annual membership fee, and then whatever the auditor costs are. And our auditors are $57.50 an hour, which is half the USDA rate, plus travel costs. So when we do kind of side-by-side comparisons for members that may have had this kind of model beforehand, it's about the same. You know, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Again, if you have the cost sharing, that can really bring it down. Some of our auditors are actually extension employees, and so they don't have to charge anything for their auditor time. So that brings the cost way down. You know, so those are the kind of variables that go into that discussion.
Yeah, so you could actually get subsidy. You don't have folks on extension or someone like Sarah who's interested in being an internal auditor. If you don't have people in extension or other agencies that can provide the internal auditing for free, most of the group gap programs have been successful at getting subsidy, at least initially, for their internal auditors. And there's a cost of getting people trained as well and up to speed as auditors.
But I think the caveat to that too is also, with any kind of subsidies, what we've seen over the past several years is a lot of times a group will get a grant to start this. But then once the grant funds run out, the group just stops and disbands. Or the farms, once they don't have the grant paying for their membership, then if they don't have a market, they don't have a buyer saying you have to be certified. There's no point in them staying certified. Yeah, Jane.
Bill, I'm curious. Do you see how your QMS system may have to be molded to maybe some diversity in that producer base? So, example of you have your QMS system and it's for a mixed vegetable group, but then you have another group over here that might just be like guava growers, or have some unique maybe environmental stuff within their production. Do you see, is it kind of tailored to that base, or is it pretty much standardized where most type of operations can fit under it?
It's pretty standard. Our group has all kinds of different growers. We have container farms that are doing hydroponics. We have traditional diversified specialty crop operations. We have some mushroom growers. We have urban farms in Detroit and Chicago. And we have university farms around there as well. And the QMS piece is mostly on, how are we going to operate as a group? And how are we going to do the internal audits? How are we going to keep our records? How are we going to review things and handle corrective actions and make sure that we're continually improving? So that's kind of what the QMS does. As long as a member can be audited under one of the USDA programs, they can be in our group. So if they were doing, say, like wheat, or soybeans, for kind of row crops or anything like that, that's kind of outside the scope of what we would do. And we do define that in our QMS.
One thing I like to reinforce is that this is really a very rigorous program without it being more effort on the farmer side. So the farmers are actually getting more support. They're oftentimes, so if Primus or Canada Gap, one of the other auditors, is doing an audit, they visit the farm once a year, one day, that's it. And this, with USDA, auditors are supposed to come at least
Twice.
usually usually twice, sometimes 3 times if it's a really long growing season. They don't always, I would say, because they may not have the capacity. But under group gap, generally they're going to get an initial audit and an unannounced audit, and they're going to get support if they fail anything in the audit. There's just a lot more time and attention given to the farmer. Sometimes they want to run screaming when you show up on their farm. That's happened. But if they need it, it's there. What's the other thing I was going to say? So the advantage to a hub with this kind of program is you get to know more about what's going on each of your farmer members' farms. And so you have a lot more oversight. You can track any patterns that need to be improved. You can follow up with farmers who are not doing what they need to do. It's not just, oh, I don't have my certificate. You actually know why they didn't pass their audit and what kind of technical assistance they need or what kind of discipline do they need, because that's true sometimes too. So it's a very supportive way of doing things the way Phil does it. I don't think all group gap programs are that supportive. But yeah.
What other questions are there?
Bill, this is like a network resource from our conversations yesterday and the rehearing your presentation today. Maybe you could speak a little bit to the advantages, and maybe you already did this, but maybe kind of clarifying for me or for anyone else interested, the advantages of having that internal auditor trained within our community, and then maybe what that participation in your group would look like, or a similar group, or our own group would look like. I just think, for my nascent understanding of your presentation about group gap, that there could be a big advantage in having someone, a few people in our community here, Spokane, Western Montana, that have that audit capability.
For sure. Yeah, so you were, to repeat the question, you were asking about the benefits and advantages of having this function, the internal auditor function, based locally, and what that could mean for your region and stuff like that. So yeah, that is another major benefit of group gap, is that it's not someone from USDA or another certifying body who's not really connected to your community at all coming out doing the audits. It's somebody who's embedded within your community and knows small farms, knows food hubs, and brings that level of expertise with them, and knows how your community operates, all of that kind of stuff. One of the things we talked about yesterday is, would it make more sense to, one, go this route, which some of the food hubs have been doing, to do this locally, or to join up with our group that we've been running nationally, and finding some individuals locally who could perform this internal auditor function, and also could perform some technical assistance functions as well, and then we'll just link up with our group and continue to build that national community of practice. So yeah, I think that's a great way to go. That's what we've been doing. That's what has happened in, especially Utah is a major one in that. Our audit team there they know the farmers that they're auditing, so they're able to keep in that close contact with them, which is helpful for chasing out invoices sometimes. And also I'm trying to remember what agency they work for. They work for, I don't care if it's not a conservation district, but something like that too. So they're already out in the community having these kind of interactions, and understanding how things are working on the farm. So yeah, I think
So they're more than just a regulator. So the internal auditors have to be regulators when they're doing their internal audits, but they're usually way more than just a regulator. And as Phil said, they're not just showing up one day or maybe 1.5 days a year to do an audit. They're around. You can call on them with questions. If there's more than one internal auditor, you can avoid the conflict of interest, so that one's providing technical assistance to a set of farms and the other one is internally auditing them, and vice versa. So, and as Phil said, and I would really emphasize this, they're then part of a community of practice of auditors, of internal auditors. So they get to have peer-to-peer exchange and mentorship. Phil is making sure that they are doing a good job. So it's just, I mean, I can't really recommend it too highly. If you want to have a group of farms, or I mean, individual farms can join as well. If you've got a group of farmers and you need them to be GAP certified, this is really a way to go. And it helps Phil because economy of scale is going to keep the price down for the farmer and the food owner.
Yeah, so one of the farms that I audit, several years ago, they had a fairly big windstorm in their area, kind of up on a little bit of a hill in northern Michigan. And they posted on Instagram a picture of their porta potty that had been blown over. and I saw it, like, I gotta ask them. So like I emailed them, I was like, hey, not to be, like big brother, but I saw this happen. Did you guys take care of this properly? Like, yes, we followed our food safety plan, it's in our logs, everything like that. So having that much closer contact helps. Or other farms that I audit, if they're doing new things or making improvements, I can follow up on those things because I know them. So it actually becomes more rigorous and harder for them to like hide things. And it happens at the group level too. Lindsay does our internal QMS audit every year and goes through that with a fine-tooth comb. Does a way better job than the USDA does. So it's
That's good to know.
I mean, not good for me always, but what other questions? Are we on time?
We have about 10 more minutes.
Brian's
8 more minutes.
8 more minutes, yes.
I actually have a question. So you're working with a lot of farms and food hubs all over the place. And we're talking mostly with them. So what are some of the kind of like tangible benefits, maybe through sales or anything else, implementing a group gap program like this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Kaylee asked what the tangible benefits are in terms of like sales and things like that of doing group gap. The biggest benefit is that all the good stuff that comes from collaboration, right? So if there's a farm in our group that has an issue with something or a question or is running into some kind of hurdle, we have a whole network of technical service providers we can tap and be like, hey, you should talk to this person. I can point them to Sarah or Lindsay or anybody locally or any of that kind of stuff. That's a huge thing. The other thing, again, that familiarity with how small farms and food hubs work is a huge one, and being in that close contact. Somebody from the FDA once described it as group gap doesn't help farms. How did he say it? It provides more of that safety net, right? So if you are on your own getting certified and you don't pass your audit, you have to figure it out, and do your corrective actions and try to figure out what they're actually asking for and then get re-audited. In here, you still have to work through corrective actions, you still have to fix the things that were wrong with the audit, but there's a lot more resources you can draw on with that. And then the other thing we're trying to do more is try to tie this certification into more market opportunities. We've started doing this a little bit with the USDA's TFAT box program, and we're hoping to do more in the coming years, but that's going to be a bigger thing too, where it's like, let me back up a little bit. We used to always say, hey, get GAP certified and you can access new markets. What happened was that it didn't always materialize. So they'd get certified and then those markets didn't just magically appear. And so what we're trying to do in our network, in our group, is find out where those opportunities are and link producers up with them, and also any additional requirements that might be beyond just the GAP standard they would have to meet. So things like that is what we're trying to work towards. We're not quite there yet, but we're working towards it. Other questions? Everyone's eyes are glazing over from an hour and a half of food safety discussion. Like, oh my God, I'm gonna go into accounting.
We didn't do an 8-hour training, that's good.
Did what?
We didn't give them an 8-hour training.
Hey, Phil.
Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of wondering, what scale-wise in this region? You know, is this something that, so we have like, just in these little introductions, like 4 fledgling small food hubs. We have several larger ones that have been around for a while. Is this a group that would cover all of those food hubs together? Would each of these individual small food hubs have a group? Would there be, you know what I mean? Like what are we looking at scale-wise?
Yeah, so the question was, what would this look like scale-wise? And that really can be up to you. You know, if you could do it as a food hub and just do it for your producers. There are some like commodity groups. There's one in Idaho that does it that way. You could do it as a group of food hubs, or you could link up with our national network and be a part of that. And each food hub would be a member, and each farm that would want to would be a member as well. And what really determines that is what kind of bandwidth and capacity do you have for this piece, for administering the group, and also perform the internal audits. You know, so for some groups, this could be almost a full-time job. So sometimes it makes more sense economically to either form a larger group or join up with a larger group, because then you don't have to find the bandwidth or funding for any of the administrative stuff. But I mean, in terms of just mechanically how the program works, it could be as small. It could be as small as 2 producers, 2 members. So I think our group, we're up to about 40 across the 7 states or whatever.
And I used to work with one that had 125 farms, different scale.
Can you repeat that last page as well?
Lindsay was saying that she used to work with a group of about 125 farmers who were all growing the same crop and all had to harvest within 2 weeks. So within that 2-week period, they were very busy. But that's a great example of how it looks in like just a commodity group setting, where we're all growing the same crop, we're all growing it for one buyer. The buyer's asking for this, so we're just going to get certified this way.
So, speaking of like a group that's growing 1 or 2 commodities, where there's a central packing house and the farms are just growing the crop and getting it to the packing house, and this is quite a lot of Amish co-ops are doing this, and they might be selling those crops through a broker. There is actually a model, and I believe some orchard co-ops are already do this through the USDA auditing, where there's one food safety plan. So this doesn't need group gap. There's one food safety plan, and each farmer is just a field manager. So you might have 50 farms that are growing onions, or and that there's a couple of different certifying bodies that will do this for you. So the co-op that runs the whole thing and runs the packing house manages the food safety plan for the entire co-op. But you need to have internal auditors or internal compliance people making sure the farms are doing all the things they have to do. And I did this down in Mississippi with a co-op that's actually now part of Phil's group, where they, at that time, they had 12 members that were growing in their front yard. So having 12 different front yard gardens, GAP certified, didn't make any sense. And the co-op trained the youth that went out to do all the work on the farm and the harvesting, and also brought the crop back to the packing house for the washing and packing. All the farmers had to do was grow the crop. They were responsible for their pre-harvest risk assessments. They were responsible for cleaning and sanitizing their equipment. And there were a few other animal monitoring, a few other things. They just had to do record keeping and some risk assessment, but they didn't have to have a food safety plan, an entire food safety plan on their properties. And that, they were, in fact, there was a GAP certification in my slide deck. That was their first time getting USDA certified. They do it differently now, but the USDA accepted it, and they said that they do this for orchards. So if all the food is just grown, it's just field operations and harvesting at the farm level, and then everything gets shipped over to a packing house, that's also another possibility. Well, I call it a single entity food safety program. And if anyone has questions about that, I can talk